Okay, everyone. Well, welcome and good evening to episode 89 of the On Air Advocate. Where at the On Air Advocate, we look to provide education, support, and empowerment for all of those with different abilities, mental and medical illnesses, and their caregivers. For those of you who may not know me, my name is Tammy Flynn, and I am the host and producer of the On Air Advocate. And I am super excited if you have stayed up late and you are watching this and tuning in this evening, or whether you are catching this on the replay. Now, as always, if you think any of this content could be relevant for anyone within your circle, your network, please hit the share button and share the love. Now, if you guys have been following the On Air Advocate on social media today, you would know that today is SUDEP Action Day. And I could think of no one better than to have on than Sally Schaeffer. Sally Schaeffer is not only a mother, an advocate, and the director of the SUDEP Institute with the National Epilepsy Foundation. So I am super excited to have you here today, Sally.
Thank you so much for inviting me to be here today, especially on SUDEP Action Day, which is a really important day for the community to recognize SUDEP.
Yeah, and I am excited as we go through this interview to learn more about SUDEP, more about the Epilepsy Foundation. But first, before we start with that, I really wanted to kind of turn to your journey and your story with your own family and epilepsy and SUDEP to share with the audience.
Sure, no problem. I always say, I'm a professional. My degree is in healthcare administration. I've worked in corporate America, and now I'm with the National Epilepsy Foundation. But most importantly, I think out of my entire life is that I'm a mom. And I'm a mom of three, and I have an older son. He's in his teens, and he's 14. And then my daughter, Lydia, and then my son, Grant. I was blessed with Lydia in 2007. And shortly after she was born, we found out she had a rare chromosome disorder. And at the time of her birth, they called it 9q34.3. So it was missing part of the a section of the long arm of her 9th chromosome.
Okay.
And we didn't really know at the time, Tammy, what that meant. They gave us a sheet of paper and they said she could have all of these things or she could not have all of these things. She's really going to tell her own story. And that started our journey on the special needs path. And
when did you, excuse me for interrupting you, when did you find out that she had that? Was that at birth you knew that there was something, or was that many months later?
No, so when she was born with impacted teeth. She had a pulmonary stenosis. She also had an ASD, which is a hole in the heart. She had a pectoral excavatum, which is an indent in the chest right by the breastbone there in the middle. And then she had her ear was kind of come out like this. So she had all of these different features about her. Yeah. And the doctors were all saying, oh, well, each one is normal and it's no problem. But she was about 3 months old, and I happened to go to a 4th of July gathering, and I met a dentist, and it was my friend's dentist. And she said, I want you to meet my friend and see her daughter. And so we walked up, and the dentist said to me, he said, everything in the body is connected. And it was like a light bulb went off to me, where I then called her pediatrician and I said, we've been looking at all of these things individually, but we haven't been looking at what maybe caused all of these things to happen. And my gut as a mother is that there is something bigger that we're missing. And I took her in at 4 months, and she had, and the pediatrician acknowledged it. And she said, you're going to be in a month, keep working on tummy time, because her muscle tone was really low too. She couldn't hold her head up. At 3 months old, it was almost like she was at the newborn phase. And I compared pictures of my older son and her, and I'm thinking, this isn't right. And my gut was just telling me something was wrong. So at 4 months, we went in. She had a fever of 104. The doctor looked at me and said, I see some facial features that look a little bit different. Her ears are lower set. I don't know what this is, but seeing that she has such a high fever, we're going to admit you to Children's Hospital, and you guys head up there now. And from then, and it was interesting because I was in the doctor's office, and she said, we could probably treat this fever and the kidney infection she's got going on right now, but let me call genetics and see how long. And I don't know what was inside me or where I got this information, but I said, I cannot wait 8 to 10 weeks to get a genetic diagnosis.
Right.
We're running against the time clock. I said, if I don't get her help now, it just doesn't help her progress. And so she called the hospital, she came back and she said, you're right, it's 8 to 10 weeks. And from there, we were admitted into the hospital to treat the kidney infection and the fever. And they started genetic testing. And 5 weeks later, we found out that through a microarray test, where they actually look at the building blocks of the chromosomes, that she was missing this small section of her 9th chromosome.
Okay, so that's how it was discovered.
Yes.
Okay.
Yep.
So then from that point of that discovery, what did that all mean within, for you, your husband, your family already? I mean, by learning that, what changed in your course of action? They handed you a slip that said you could have all these things, but was she exhibiting any of those things at that time?
Yes, actually she became, it was a snowball effect from there. We found out in September, October, that she had this rare chromosome disorder. And then we went into the winter with all of these illness. She had low muscle tone, which means everywhere. So in her lungs, so she developed colds very easily and pneumonia. She was hospitalized a lot, and I just felt so lost. I was calling doctors kind of like out of the yellow pages of Children's Hospital, wondering, who do I get? What's the problem? We were in the ER all the time. And I met this really awesome doctor. It was 4:30 in the morning. We had, come through emergency. And he said, there's this program with our Children's Hospital that coordinates all the care. He said, your daughter, looking at her records, she's already been so sick as an infant and a baby. And he said, I think you'd really benefit from the special needs program at Children's Hospital. And they help coordinate your care. You get assigned a case manager. Mm-hmm. And I just felt like huge relief. And he said, but I have to submit your case. They have to review it. And then they determine whether or not she qualifies for the program. And I can still remember the day, Tammy, when I got the call that she was admitted to the program. I felt this huge weight off my shoulders. Like, now I'm going to get help. I'm going to get the right doctors for her condition. They're going to help me. They're going to help guide me. I'm going to have nurses in the room, or a nurse case manager in the room, to help me when I don't hear the things that I need to hear, ask the things I need to ask. And I really felt like my daughter had gotten to this prestigious program. It was almost like she had gotten into Notre Dame, and I was so excited. Because I felt so much like I was drowning, because I was new in the special needs world, and I wasn't sure where to go. So she was admitted into that program. That really helped. I mean, I could call them before I went into the ER. They would coordinate the care with the ER. We had plans in place. It was really helpful, because she was really sick. I mean, hospitalized all the time, especially in the early years of her life. So.
Okay. And then, so when you're doing all these hospitalizations, that's happening, you're finding out all of this new information. What was kind of like the turning point, I guess, for you? Did that just stay steady the whole time? Or was there some, peaks or different things that really, where she gained some skill, or some things came back and her health got better, or did it decline? Were there kind of peaks and valleys within that next extent of time, or not really?
It was definitely peaks and valleys. I mean, I'm the type of mom that it wasn't all negative. There was definitely so many positives of her life, and what she was doing. She developed milestones later than others. And that was something I learned really quickly, that I was putting these expectations on her. Okay, I wanted her to sit up by a year old, and that didn't happen. And I got disappointed, and I realized that I needed to take everything as she brought it. And her and I worked as a team. Mm-hmm. I, pushed, because that's what we as mothers should do, is allow them to be the best that they can be. But I also knew that she was going to gain these things on her own time. And so she would get sick, she'd be hospitalized, and yes, we'd have regression, but then we'd kick it and move forward and keep going. So it was peaks and valleys, and I never saw it as, I don't want to say giving up. I never gave up on her. I just continued to go, okay, it's a little setback. Let's move forward now. Setback. Let's move forward. She walked at the age of 5. That was amazing. She attended, she had therapies in school, but she also attended a medically based therapy out of Kenosha called Tender Touch Therapy. Those ladies are amazing, amazing, amazing women. And they saw through her sassiness, and they really, I mean, one day she came home and she just walked. So it was awesome.
Gosh. Oh my gosh. So hitting those milestones a little bit later than some, but still progressing, And I know that in the mix of all of this, where did epilepsy come in? I mean, did she get diagnosed with that right away?
No. So at 18 months, I think it was Memorial Day weekend or Labor Day weekend. It's such a fog. But she had her first seizure, and it was really super hot out. It was probably in the 90s. And so we attributed that first seizure to the heat. I still remember she had the seizure. My husband and I and my little guy got in the car, and we started just racing towards Children's Hospital. And my husband was shaking, and he finally said, no, I think we've got to take her by ambulance. We didn't see a lot of seizures after that, but at around 3, if I can remember correctly, she started having more seizures. And when she had her first one, we didn't put her on any medication. I was really hesitant, and we had an EEG, a 3 to 4 hour EEG at the time. Nothing showed up, so we didn't do any medications. But then a couple years later, she was having more seizures, and they would attribute them to febrile seizures. They started saying, well, these are febrile seizures. And I kept saying, no, I don't think these are febrile seizures. Epilepsy does come with the diagnosis of Kleefstra, or it can come with that diagnosis. Not all Kleefstra children. And I should say the name of her chromosome disorder ended up being called Kleefstra Syndrome. So some people with that disorder may, have epilepsy, some may not. So I started taking her temperature before the seizures, and she wasn't having any fevers. And so once I was able to show them that there was no fevers before the seizures, they said, okay, we need to do a more in-depth EEG. And they said, we should probably put her on epilepsy medication. And so they put her on, what I asked to be the most mild medication for her. And it really kept it at bay for a few years.
Okay, so she wasn't having regular seizures. Was it like, would you say once a year? Would you say once every 6 months?
We'd probably have once every 4 to 5, 6 months. I mean, usually they reared their ugly head when she was sick. And so we kind of expect, okay, she's ill, she's going to seize. And once she was on the medication, she was pretty controlled until June of 2013.
Okay. And was she having the seizures, you said, connected to having colds, but was she having them during the day or at night? I'm just kind of starting to learn more. As you know, my son doesn't have epilepsy and never has had that condition. And so when you're entrenched in the world, you become an expert on whatever topic that is. And so from other friends that have children with epilepsy, some of them talk about whether you have it coming out of your sleep or in the evening, and that makes it different or not.
We, at that time, when she was like 3 or 4, when they actually put her on epilepsy medication, and this is going back so many years, so I'm trying to remember, exactly, but when she was 3 or 4, when they said, okay, we need to put her on epilepsy medication, there were seizures that we saw. They were more like tonic-clonic. So the ones where she was shaking, and for those that aren't aware of epilepsy or seizures, I'm not mocking it at all, but I'm just trying to demonstrate. She would shake vigorously. Her body would get stiff. We actually had oxygen in our home because we had a pulse oximeter, so we would monitor her pulse. We would monitor her oxygen level. The machine would beep if the oxygen level got below 80. We would put oxygen on her usually because her pulse would race and then her oxygen level would go down. We also had rectal emergency medicine because any seizure over 5 minutes is so detrimental to the brain. to have that activity going for that long. And so we had the medicine available. We as a family always called 911. We always called Children's Hospital as far as and getting their folks on the phone. We had as part of the special needs program, we had a 24-hour hotline that we could call, and then usually they would call us back, and I would consult with them, and I would say, it's 3 minutes. Do we deliver the diastat? Or if her seizure lasted a minute, we wouldn't deliver that emergency rectal medicine. It's called diastat. We wouldn't deliver that because it was less than 5 minutes. So we were usually consulting. The ambulance would usually come, take her in, just make sure to get her checked out and be okay. And if we needed to transfer her, for instance, if her fever was really high, she would be transferred. So there was, every person with epilepsy is very unique and different. People have different types of epilepsies in different situations. Some are controlled epilepsy. They're controlled by medication. And then you also have intractable epilepsy, which it's uncontrollable by medications and things like that. So you can't categorize epilepsy. Everyone's not the same. And that's makes everybody unique. Okay. Even where they're located. I mean, you could have focal epilepsy where it's in one, they see the epilepsy in the one part of the brain. And then you can have generalized epilepsy where seizures are happening all over.
Really? Okay. And so at what age did you say that she seemed to have that increase where it went from not every 4 months, it went to how often?
So what I really saw was in March of 2013, she had a really bad seizure. And I remember very clearly, I was actually interviewing a caregiver, and she went into having a seizure on the floor of her bedroom. And I got the oxygen out, I got the pulse ox, and it was such a strong seizure. The presentation of the seizure was so different than I had seen before, and it was very odd to me. And I delivered the rectal diastat, and in the past, when I had done that, she usually stopped seizing right away, and this seizure continued. Very scary. I just knew, this sounds really weird or bad, but I don't know. But I think a lot of moms and parents say this, but I was very much led by my gut and my instinct, and my instinct told me that this seizure presentation was so much different and something had changed with her. Being naive about epilepsy at that time, I thought she just needs a different medication. This medication isn't strong enough for her. We're just going to get a new medication and she'll, it'll be fine. She'll be okay. So I we got into a neurology appointment a couple months or a month later. And he said, well, we'll do a 3 or 4 hour EEG. And I'm all about the data. I think data is so important. And sometimes with 3 or 4 hours or even an hour EEG, you're not going to catch everything, especially with her. She wasn't actively seizing during the day all the time. Right. And so I really encouraged, well, why wouldn't we do an overnight EEG? And he said, oh, you would let her stay overnight? And I said, of course, the more data. Again, I'm so thankful. I'm a woman of faith, and I'm so thankful that my instinct and my gut led me to say that, because she went inpatient. She had an overnight EEG in the epilepsy monitoring unit. Really important too for anyone listening here to Tammy to point out is go to an epilepsy center. Make sure you're at a level 3 or level 4 epilepsy center. That's so important. There's neurologists there that are dealing with epilepsy all the time, and make sure you're seeing a neurologist that really knows epilepsy, or see an epileptologist. They have a couple of years experience specifically with epilepsy. So that is one message I want to share here today, because I think that's so important. People know that too. So she went to the epilepsy monitoring unit at Children's. Her neurologist really focuses on epilepsy, or has that as something he treats more often than others. Mm-hmm. And the next morning they came in the room, and she had just fallen asleep really in the last few hours. And so it was about 5:30 in the morning. And the doctor walked in, and the doctor's demeanor was different than I had ever experienced in having my daughter hospitalized.
Okay.
She stood next to my daughter's bed. She spoke in a normal tone, even though my daughter was sleeping. And she kind of alerted me to get up and get my things together. And what they saw in the EEG was very, what they called impressive. And I say that with quotes because my term of impressive is so different than theirs.
Right.
But the way that she delivered the message was scary. It was hard. It was, I was scared. I was scared, and I sat on the edge of my bed, and I'm like, okay, this is serious. This woman's coming in here at 5:30 in the morning, 6 o'clock, waking me up, talking normal around my daughter who just went to sleep. I got to get it together. And she had told me that they saw seizures in her sleep. And I said, well, I didn't see any seizures. I didn't hear anything. And she said, no, these seizures are occurring subclinically. You can't see them with your eye. Her brain is seizing over 80% of her non-REM sleep. And she said, the neurologist will be in a few hours. You need to get your thoughts together. You need to get your questions together, and he'll be in. And I was fortunate enough to be part of a special needs group of moms who we educated each other, and we supported each other and loved each other. And I just remember one mom telling me, subclinical is so bad. It's so bad. You never want to have subclinical. And I just sat on the edge of that plastic bed that day, and I bawled harder than I think when I got her diagnosis, because I was now so scared. The fear that I had for her life just was right there. And by the time I got to this point, I didn't need the nurse case manager anymore. I loved her. If she's listening, I love her. I'm still friends with her. But I had become this special needs mom who was this clear advocate. I knew my daughter. I felt strong enough to go in by myself. But that day I called her and I said, you need to come. I can't do this. And we sat with the neurologist for like an hour, and he told me, he said her diagnosis is so rare. He said over 25 years, he's only seen a couple hundred cases, which sounds like a lot, but I think in his career with continuous epilepsy care,
right,
that's not a lot. He said it's called electrical status epilepticus and slow wave sleep. And he said her brain isn't resting. She's seizing the entire time, 80% of her non-REM sleep. And he proceeded to tell me there was only a few pharmaceutical options that would touch these seizures. And then we started to embark upon that about trying.
Like what you could use, what would be.
But one of the weakest points in my life, I think, was that day. And telling my husband that I called my husband and my mom, and they said, what do you need? And I said, I gotta go. I cannot be here. I cannot do this. I am so scared, and I have to pull it together. And so I gotta go. And my husband came and relieved me, and he sat in the EMU unit with her for the next 2 days while they put medicine in her each night to try to get rid of the seizures. And neither of the medicines they provided to her, pharmaceutical medicines through her IVs, touched her seizures. And I left for those 2 days and kind of got myself together while my husband tended to her. No one left her side. If you ever have to be in an EMU unit with a child, you have to be with them. Someone has to be with them in that room at all times. If the child gets up, they usually have to wear a helmet in case they fall, and they have a backpack with their
Electrical stuff inside of it.
Yes,
All the
yes.
cords and
So,
stuff.
but I came back the day that she was getting discharged, and you know, it's sad. I feel like it makes me a bad mother, but I needed to gain who I was, and I needed to grasp this and take a hold of it and figure out the next plan. And they sent her home and they put her on a very strong dose of steroids. I guess apparently sometimes steroids resets the brain for this type of seizure. And it worked for about a month, and then she started seizing again. And the steroids did a total number on her body. She felt horrible. She screamed a lot. We couldn't take her outside the home. She didn't want to be touched a lot. She just really wanted to be left alone. If anybody's ever been on steroids, people respond differently and feel different. And so it was a tough go. And we put pharmaceutical med on top of pharmaceutical med and tried this journey. We finally put her on one big, it's called a benzodiazepine, called Onfi. And the side effects of that were grueling for her, awful. She started to regress in her physical therapy and occupational therapy. She was pretty much zoned out all the time, sleeping. Like I would go into school and she'd be sleeping on the desk, not engaging with any aides or teachers. And it was hard to see. And my daughter was also evaluated for brain surgery as well. And we sat for 2 hours with the neurosurgeon and the neurologist to discuss this option. And you know, being special needs, my daughter was disabled in so many ways. She was nonverbal. She was fully diapered. We had to feed her, change her, bathe her. She walked at the age of 5, but it wasn't a directed walk. So I couldn't say, Lydia, come to mom, and she would come to me. She walked wherever she wanted to walk. And then on long distances, she was in a wheelchair. And so with brain surgery, they told us there was only a 50% possible success rate for her, but they may have to take out some of her functions. So if it was in the occipital lobe, you know, it would take out that function, or depending on where it was. And 50% just didn't seem like enough to us at the time. And it was a really hard decision to make on whether or not we move forward with that brain surgery. And ultimately, as a couple, we decided that we would not, because the seizures, even if you did take out that portion of the brain, the seizures could come back. And we thought, well, then what does that leave her, and where are we at, and all of that. So
her loss of function is more than where she was already starting from that,
right.
From that starting point. And so you guys kind of dissolved the thought of doing surgery. Where were you at with medications? Did you finally say, no, we're not going to do, you know, some of those higher medications that were giving her bad side effects at home? Or did you continue on with a med the whole time?
Well, she was on the benzodiazepine Onfi, and she was on it in the morning and at night. My daughter, as we evaluated her for surgery, went to neuropsychology. And when they got done with their evaluation, they came out and they said, you know, she has autism as well. My daughter had no affect, and I think that helped in the journey a lot, because she wasn't emotionally attached to me. I could leave a room, she wouldn't care. They would wheel her off to surgery. She didn't cry or get upset. But she was on that Onfi, and there was one Sunday afternoon where she didn't cry a lot. She had a very high pain tolerance. And so that afternoon, she was in her room and she crawled around crying. And I was sitting in her room feeling very lost, feeling very scared, and feeling very helpless as her mother. And she crawled up on my lap, which she never really did, and she cried in my shoulder. And I told her that I would do whatever I could to help her. And I told her, I said, you hang on, baby girl, you hang on, because mom is going to work really hard for you. and I'm going to do what I can. So you hang on. And I just kept telling her I was really sorry, because I felt so sorry for her and all the frustration that she was feeling, what the seizures were doing to her, what the medications were doing to her. I could see what the medications were doing to her. And I just felt so awful for her. And I felt as a mother, it's my job to make her okay. And I couldn't do that for her. So I just kept telling her I was sorry. I was sorry I couldn't do more than I was already doing. And part of what I was doing was trying to get approval for a therapeutic medicine here in Wisconsin called CBD, with a ton of other amazing parents in this state. And I felt like that was my last option, my last hope for her. And so I just kind of told her to hang on. I was hoping that would be something she would be able to try.
And so did she get to the point of being able to ever try that?
So in Wisconsin, in 2014, that's kind of when the CBD movement really got notoriety across the country. And again, thanks to all these amazing parents all over the state, here in Wisconsin and all over the country. I mean, I've met so many of them, and I am so proud to call them friends. And I have so much respect and admiration for every single one that really fought the good fight to make people aware of this.
Right.
A law was passed in April 16th of 2014 here in Wisconsin, and it allowed for CBD, but one of our senators here put a contingency on it that you would need an FDA investigational license. And unfortunately, you're talking about FDA, you're talking about investigational, it's almost like a clinical research study. Right. And so those take a lot of manpower, a lot of money. And I had indicated when the law passed, I'm afraid that this is going to halt these efforts. And sure enough, it passed, and that's what happened. Is, you couldn't get it right away. And it was 22 days later, on Mother's Day, I left to go with my own mother up north. We always spent the weekend in Door County. It was kind of our tradition. Being a special needs mom, I'm sure you know, there's not a lot of time to yourself. There's not a lot of time you get away. There's not a lot of respite. And that weekend was really precious to my mom and I. It was a beautiful, beautiful weekend in 2014, 70-degree weather, gorgeous weekend. One of the most beautiful weekends that we can remember ever, because it's always usually a little chilly in Mother's Day. And Mother's Day morning, I got up, and my mom was in the other room having her coffee where we were staying. And I thought to myself, okay, I've had 2 days of downtime, and now I go back to this life of advocacy and motherhood and go back at it. And the phone rang, and I could hear my mom saying, what? Tell me again. And I got on the phone, and my husband was crying, and he said, you need to come home. You need to come home right now. And there was a lot of commotion. They were talking about blood. And I hung up, and I remember crouching by the front window of where we were staying, and I called back, and I said, you need to tell me right now what's going on, what is happening. And my husband was crying, and he said, she's gone. She's gone. She's gone. Just please come home. And I said, what do you mean she's gone? What did the EMTs do? And he said there was nothing that they could do. They couldn't help her. By the time my husband had gone into her bedroom at 8:00 in the morning, what he had seen was that she was blue, and he thought she was having a seizure. but unfortunately she had passed in the middle of the night and had already been gone for several hours. When you have nocturnal epilepsy, it is thought that you are more at risk for SUDEP. And SUDEP is sudden unexpected death in epilepsy. And they don't really know the causes of this yet. There is research going on. The Centers for SUDEP Research out of the NIH and NINDS, they're doing research, but they don't know what causes it. But that is why when I heard subclinical, I got so scared and I cried so hard, is because I knew that she was at this very high risk for dying in her sleep. Although her medical professionals never, ever uttered that word SUDEP, I knew as a special needs mom and being in this world that this was a huge possibility for her. And that's what put me in fear, and that's what helped spearhead me to try to get a therapeutic option legalized and fight for that and bring awareness to it and really educate people on epilepsy and the possibility. I mean, I even testified in Wisconsin that I was so scared about opening her door that morning and not having her with us anymore. And unfortunately, it wasn't me, it was my husband who had to experience that.
Your journey is so incredibly profound and powerful. And the fight of knowing that you went to the extent of leaving no stone unturned anywhere, from changing laws to changing everything. And with SUDEP, why, I'm just trying to put all the pieces of all the things that you said to me, why was no one talking about it? Why were doctors not talking about it? And why you were in the hospital? And so I'm assuming that other children that may be experiencing, they don't know why they're having, their seizures, that they do overnight, right? They do overnight testing too. So there has to be others that those doctors have come into the room to say the same thing. After that conversation with them, did they talk about this? Was this a conversation? And why wasn't it?
No, so they never talked about it. And ironically, in my new role, which I know we're going to get to, but I ordered my daughter's medical records from the time that she was given the diagnosis in June of 2013 to the time that she died. And I combed every single page because I wanted to see, did I miss it? Because I don't remember ever hearing it. Even though I knew the possibility, I just wanted to see, did I miss it? Where was it documented that we had this discussion? And it was never documented. I can tell you that I met with someone that was directly involved in her care on the professional side after she died. And they even asked me, they said, Sally, I never heard them say fatal. Did you ever hear them say fatal? And I said, no. And she goes, but how did you know? How did you know? And here was someone else in the medical profession that also didn't hear it, didn't know. Why they're not talking about it is as good as question that I'm still right now trying to overcome, really. I think people are so scared because SUDEP, they still don't know what the causes are of it. And I've been told by medical professionals, well, we don't want to scare people. I've heard every different reason, like, well, what if my patient is new? I don't want to scare them with SUDEP and then I never see them again. But yet it's so important to talk about, because if you can control someone's seizures, you're at a less risk for SUDEP than if they're, if let's say someone's not adhering to their medication, or they're burning the midnight oil and not getting a lot of sleep and not taking care of their body, that puts them more at risk. If they're drinking or taking illicit drugs, that puts them at higher risk. So these are things that, Tammy, that question is so key because it should be talked about. It should be talked about.
Right, because how would the public know? How do you build awareness? How do you campaign for research funds to go back to discover an answer if you don't
So,
talk about it? If nobody talks about it, how do you build those things?
right,
How do you raise that awareness?
right, exactly. So, we'll get back to that, but let me jump forward. So when Lydia died, I also advocated at the federal level for this therapeutic treatment for CBD oil, and with, like I said, parents across the country whom I adore and love. I can't say that enough. They're so wonderful. And I continued working at my job, but I had always told my husband that there was really more for me to do with this journey. My daughter was given to me for a reason, and she was taken to me for a reason. And I really felt that I had found my voice. I'd found strength in her. I advocated in fields I wasn't comfortable with, like the educational realm. I really wasn't comfortable, but I read up and I learned all about IEPs. I did that. I figured out things medically that even doctors couldn't figure out, where I was able to help make her better by fighting for what I thought was right for her.
Right.
So I told my husband, I'm like, I don't know where this is supposed to take me, but I'm going to wait for it. And when it comes, I'll know it. And it's where I need to be. And so she died in 2014. In 2017, last fall, I had just gotten a different job, corporate job, 6 months earlier, but I went online one night and on LinkedIn Jobs, and I typed in epilepsy, and up came this role for the SUDEP director. And again, for those jumping in or listening, it's sudden unexpected death in epilepsy. And I started reading through the description, and it was 10:30 at night, and my husband had, just put his head down on the pillow, and I'm like, this is it. This is it. I found it. I found where I need to be next. I found what I need to be doing. And my husband said, well, that's great, honey, but it's 10:30. Let's talk about it in the morning. And I'm like, but you don't get it.
I know.
So I felt this renewed passion. And so to say that I pursued the role with a vengeance, they were doing a nationwide search. But I really felt like the stars aligned. I contacted the Epilepsy Foundation of Wisconsin. The executive director at the time was actually on the SUDEP Institute board. And so he was very familiar with it. I mean, what are the odds of that, right? And I just started interviewing and showing my passion for it and saying, listen, but I always thought, if it's not meant to be, then this isn't where I'm supposed to be. I really feel like she guides me to where I need to be to do the right things and help the right people. And so they finally offered me the job in December, and I started in January of this year as the SUDEP Institute director. And so that's where I am today, is really creating awareness, going back to what you were saying, creating awareness and education around SUDEP. I'm also wanting to drive research, because funding for the Centers for SUDEP Research, the NIH, ends in 2019. There are other great organizations doing research as well. Cure out of Chicago. There's also different physicians around the country and scientists and researchers that are doing other studies. North American SUDEP Registry out of NYU with Dr. Oren Davinsky, Dr. Dan Friedman. They're doing some research on tissue samples and brains from individuals who have died. They also have live, control samples as well. So there's a lot of great work going on. But one of my goals for 2019 is to have a research summit and bring all of these minds together and see how we can collaborate and really drive home some additional research. But then the other part of the SUDEP Institute, Tammy, is helping the bereaved as well. I can't leave that out either. But you talk about awareness and knowing about SUDEP that drives the numbers to research. I just went to a medical examiners conference last weekend or 2 weekends ago, and it really prompted me to look at my daughter's death certificate more in depth. And not once was SUDEP mentioned on the death certificate. So she is not a statistic in SUDEP. They actually put that it was an accident, that she had asphyxia, and the secondary was her Kleefstra Syndrome. So I'll be working to get that amended, but I hear that a lot from the bereaved, where that medical examiners don't want to put SUDEP on it. And so my job of going to the medical examiner conference was actually to educate about SUDEP. There was a white paper or position paper written about recommendations for medical examiners with SUDEP. So that was presented by one of the authors. And then I had a booth there with the North American SUDEP Registry to really talk about why it's important. Because you're right, if we don't have the right numbers documented, the government that's seeing, the statistics that
they're not seeing
right.
Right. Right now, obviously you just saying that the numbers are not all correct across the board, especially with you learning this at that conference. Where would you say the numbers that you guys do have validated right now per year do you have any of those numbers? Like out of how many?
I don't have those numbers. Like 1 in 26 have epilepsy. I actually have something in front of me from SUDEP Action, which is out of the UK. They say approximately 50 million people worldwide have epilepsy, making it one of the most common neurological conditions globally. And we know that 50%, they state 50% of all epilepsy deaths are SUDEP. And that's why, today we have what we call SUDEP Action Day. And the theme of this year is to act. You talk about these, that nobody was talking about it with me. And that is in talking with the bereaved, like I do all the time in this role, I would say that is the 99% of people will say that. I never knew that my loved one could die from epilepsy. Right. I know when I first came into this role, I talked to a mom from Wisconsin whose daughter was just diagnosed with epilepsy. And we had this very long discussion about what questions she should ask, how she should advocate for her daughter. And she said to me, she goes, and her daughter was actually having seizures in her sleep. So again, putting her at a very high risk. And she said to me, I never knew. I just thought she would get medicine and make the seizures go away. And it was an education for her to really be proactive in having this discussion with her daughter's neurologist. And, I said, well, how do they know that it's seizures at night? Did they do a 24-hour EEG? What is really asking these questions? And I know that for some living with epilepsy, it's really super scary, but those questions need to be asked. They need to be posed to their medical professional to find answers. So the theme of this year is of SUDEP Action. And you can go to sudepaction.org if you want more information, but the theme is act. Like ask those questions. Like what are my risk factors?
Right.
How can I reduce my risks? And asking some questions of the healthcare team, and then communicating, sharing out stories like I am today, how to manage the risk, and raising awareness about SUDEP with others, and then finally take action, manage those risks. I talked to someone today that has a family member with epilepsy, and they're a young adult. They're in their early 20s, and he's not taking his medicine daily and on time and on schedule. Maybe having beers and drinks, which you should stay away from. And they're really scared that they're going to lose their loved one. And that's something to think about. Tammy, this talk is not supposed to be anything scary. It's supposed to just create knowledge and power to have these conversations if they're not being mentioned to them. And really for the young adult population, they're not invincible, and they need to be aware of how to manage their risks and, have a healthy lifestyle and things like that.
Now, for doctors across the board, obviously you guys have the SUDEP, Institute now and all of those things. Are neurologists being more educated that this is a conversation? So in 2018, when you go to the neurology clinic, obviously we both live in a state with one of the most top-notch children's hospitals in the entire nation. Would you say that parents are hearing about these risk factors? Are they, being more educated on it today? I mean, especially with there being, a whole other entity now. Because when did the SUDEP Institute, when did that start?
So that started in 2013, and in collaboration with another parent who had lost a child and the National Epilepsy Fund, the National Epilepsy Foundation, it was started to really bring awareness to this topic. And I would say 10 years ago, you weren't hearing at all about SUDEP. There was very little conversation. And I think some would say, well, we're still not hearing about it. But I think that needle has been moved a little bit. And again, you know, I'm going to continue to move the needle. I'm going to continue to push these conversations. I attended the American Academy of Neurology conference, and I had some residents come by my booth, and you know, we talked, and I know one said, well, I'm really scared to have this conversation. I don't want to scare people. And I said, well, let me put it this way. If you were to see a newborn and a mother, and what would you tell them about? What would be important to tell them? Would you relay about SIDS? And he said, yes. And I said, or let's say you're a cardiologist and you have someone with heart disease. Would you tell them that changing their lifestyle could help them live longer and possibly not die? And he said, well, yeah. And I said, or someone with cancer, are you going to tell them whether they're going to beat this cancer or whether they have 6 months? And he said, yes. And I said, then why wouldn't you tell them on how to manage their risk and decrease risk of SUDEP? And he looked at me and he touched my arm and he said, you've just helped me change the way I'm going to practice. So I think that's a start, but there is so much work to be done in this area. I think it's a tough conversation. It's a really tough conversation, especially if you're giving someone a new diagnosis. But I can tell you, out of all the families that I talked to, I think I've only had 1 or 2 say, I wish I would have never known about it. I wouldn't have wanted to know about it. Otherwise I'd have been too scared. But the majority of families say, I wish I would have known. I wish they would have mentioned it. I have one father whose son, they did not find therapeutic levels of medication in him. And he said to me, maybe had he known that he could die if he didn't take his medication, he would have been more diligent. And as a parent, I'm sure that hurts so much. And so that's important. And I think that's why physicians need to talk about it more. We have some really great ambassadors of SUDEP and physicians that are, you know, really heartfelt about this cause and doing whatever work they can to move the needle. But I think nationwide and worldwide, we still have work to do. Definitely.
Well, and those parents, you know, that you talk to, I'm sure that, like you're saying, the majority of them probably felt the same as you, is that knowledge is powerful. You know, it gives us the power to move forward and create change, and all those things that you were doing, you know, for Lydia while she was here, and getting the information that you could and fighting as hard as you could. You know within yourself that you left no stone unturned. And I think that every parent wants to have that feeling that they have exhausted all, you know, I'm saying all the options. And the fact of the matter is that for any conditions medically that we have, when the medical teams and people know about this, them not sharing it, you know, with their patients is truly an injustice, because how can we as parents leave no stone unturned if we don't even know something exists? And so,
and I would say as a parent that's lost a child, I know that, Tammy, you look at me and say you've left no stone unturned. But I can tell you, I as a mother still feel so much pain and guilt that I still didn't do enough for her. Should I have moved to Colorado where it was legal already? I mean, social media went crazy on me. They said, oh, that mother should have moved, you know. And the guilt that you have, because as a mother, you are the one that are supposed to keep your children safe and alive and progressing in life. And so I wish, you know, I just went to my son's school and talked to them about how a bill becomes a law. And the teacher asked me, she said, do you blame the legislators and the physicians for the bill not going through for her to be able to try the CBD? And I looked over at her and I said, no, not once have I blamed the politician who put that FDA investigational license on. Not once do I blame her neurologist or team. I said I blame myself, that I just feel like as a parent I didn't do enough. And that that has taken a lot of work to move past and not feel that guilt, because as a parent of a child who's dead, that just so weighs so heavy. So even though you may feel like you've unturned every stone, you always feel like there was just one, maybe
there could have been one more thing
right.
that you could have done. And do you find within this role now, though, I feel like you are like a blessing to all of these parents. I really do. I feel like your daughter Lydia is working through you so much. And I know that you are a woman of faith as well, to be able to pass this on and to have this position and to be able to push for these things to change. And now, you know, given the fact of all that has happened, you know, creating this for hundreds of thousands, a million, you said 50 million people have epilepsy. You know, if you can create change in people learning about things and being able to actively get treatments and, you know, research and all of that, I don't know, it just is such, I just think you, as you said, I'm at a loss for words, the position that you are in is just a God, you know, a godsend. I think you are an angel to so many of these families. And I don't know if since January you started your position, if you have just felt like so much presence of your little girl, as well as really these families feeling like they have someone they can finally connect with. I'm sure that so many families feel like nobody understands when they're talking to them. And have you found that, you know, the parents really feel that way when they're with you?
I think so. I really feel like I've made some strong connections. I can relate to these families and what they're going through, the emotions of grief. I ask them a lot about, you know, their other children, if they have them, or, you know, even if it's a spouse too. I mean, there's people that have contacted me that have lost their sibling and it's hard on them, or their spouse or their child. I mean, all different relationships. I wouldn't say, I would say with me in this role, I definitely have a huge understanding of how bad it hurts to lose someone you love so tragically. And I feel like that is, it bonds us. I mean, I notice that when I meet someone that's lost a child, we are bonded, whether we would have been friends or not. There's that common bond. And I think especially this is such a rare situation with SUDEP, that losing someone from epilepsy definitely has bonded me and many of the families nationwide. I mean, I remember when I first came on this job, there was a family that lost their daughter, and they called me, and I cried with them. I felt that father's pain to the core, and I felt so awful. Like I just wanted to crawl through the phone and hug him. I felt so bad, and I wanted to make it better. And I know this journey all too well, and I know I can't except by listening and being there for them. Mm-hmm. And I've met him and his wife in person, and we've hugged and we've connected, and I check on them every once in a while. I just shoot them an email and say, you know, you're on my mind today. Are you okay? How are things? Angelversaries, we call them angelversaries, when the death date comes up or the birth date comes up and I know about it, I'll send families a little note, because those dates, the anticipation is awful of coming up to those dates. So I do feel like my daughter is definitely the wind beneath my wings in this role, and I have felt her presence more than once. And I believe that she's guiding me on my journey for the rest of my life of where I need to be and the message that needs to be heard at what time. So it's an emotional job, but one that I feel very passionate about, and I feel purposeful. When she was alive, I really felt a purpose. And when she died, I felt very lost because I knew I wanted to help people and I wanted to make a difference. God gave me this voice, and he gave me the ability to use it. And I want to do it for good. And so I do feel very very blessed to be here and being able to help some of these families get through this pain.
And moving this movement of people learning more about SUDEP, and hopefully creating the change. I know you're going to, along with all the team of these other parents, you're going to. I shouldn't say, I hope. I know that you're going to within this role. So if people have been listening for our time together tonight, if people have been on and listening or listened to this on the replay, how can they get involved? What would be the most impactful things for them to do to help this movement move forward and create change, create awareness, all of those things? What are some of those things that they can do?
I think if you are living with epilepsy, having those conversations with medical professionals and letting them know that they need to talk about it. Feel strong, feel empowered, have information that you're going to your medical professionals, and encourage them to continue to have these conversations with others because they need to be had. That creates the awareness and the education, and it lets medical professionals know they need to talk about it. You can share over social media about your epilepsy. I know sometimes it's a hard topic to talk about, but sharing about SUDEP. I have individuals all over the country that would like to become ambassadors for the SUDEP Institute, meaning whatever state they live in, if we could utilize some of their skills to help spread awareness and the message. I am the director and the sole individual working in the SUDEP Institute, so it's a lot to tackle for one person. But if we have ambassadors across the country that have lost someone, or even someone that's living with epilepsy that just wants people to know about SUDEP, they can email me at sudep@efa.org. And really just sharing the message about SUDEP and epilepsy. And if you know someone with epilepsy, educating them. And we're on Facebook. It's SUDEP Institute /Epilepsy Foundation. And I'm putting things out there all the time to share and to throw out knowledge and information out there about SUDEP.
And I will drop in the top text, I'm going to drop all of the different Facebook pages. We will put in there your email. So if people want to email you, they can do that to get involved. And if you are just someone from the outside, is not affected by epilepsy in your family, but you are like, okay, there needs to be a call to action here. There needs to be, change. There needs to be more research done. Obviously, sharing things as always on social media, using your voice in whatever ways you can. But I'm assuming that donations help that research then to go farther.
Absolutely. So if you were to go to epilepsy.com, there's a donate button on the top, and you can actually select the SUDEP Institute to donate to. Or you can contact us and ask for a donation to go directly to the SUDEP Institute. I talked about some of our goals earlier and definitely want to pursue them, but you can donate directly to the SUDEP Institute in memory of someone, in honor of someone, or just if you feel really passionate about this cause and moving forward and what we're trying to achieve. Most definitely. Thank you for mentioning that.
Yes, no, I just think that I'm
always so good about talking about how we help, but I'm not, I have to be better about saying, yes, we are raising money to do that.
Well, and it is, we both have been going since like the very wee hours of the morning, and it's 9:30 at night now. So, it's okay if I have one or two things slip, and we will drop all those things below. One thing I want to reiterate and go back to something that Sally said. If your gut ever tells you anything, being a special needs mom, for the last 21 years, I am telling you, do not just take, okay, we're going to do this for an answer. If you feel anything like there needs to be a more extended test, a longer stay, more things explored, other doctors that you talk to, you are your child's best advocate. You are their voice. You are their attorney. You need to be out there, campaigning, fighting, and investigating everything. Though we want to rely on our doctors a lot for information, we really need to dig ourselves to make sure that we're getting the answers. Obviously, they're seeing thousands upon thousands of patients every day. And so I always say the squeaky wheel does get the oil. and raising questions to your physicians.
Well, and really the way that I looked at it was I spent all my time with my child.
Mm-hmm.
And so a medical professional was my partner
Right.
in solving that care. So you use your medical knowledge, I use my knowledge as a parent, and then we work together to solve this. And I always found that if no one was willing to partner with me and it was very one-sided, that I knew I needed to find a different physician for my daughter because I wanted somebody who was actually going to be my partner. And I found a lot of great partners. And I found some that didn't want to partner. And then I knew I needed to find that partner. So I always tell parents that too, especially if it's a child or even if it's yourself, right? I mean, find somebody that's going to partner with you and listen to you. Lydia's nurse case manager retired after she died. And she said, you taught me a lot. And it made me realize that, you had a lot to bring to the table too as a parent and what your knowledge level was. And even her teacher said that, you taught us a lot. And that was really refreshing and good to hear. You knew those were good partners, right? Because they were taking it in and learning from it versus saying it's just my way. So that's really what a great message to share, Tammy. Wonderful.
Yes. We need to have a team. I'm always like, if you're not on the team, you're off the roster. You're not on it. So with that, I also want to say today being SUDEP, or it's almost going to be the end of the day, but today being SUDEP Action Day, as I spoke to Sally about earlier today, the sun was shining and blessing all of us all today. And I can't help but think that that was her little girl, Lydia, shining upon all of us. So
well, and seeing my daughter's favorite song that calmed her was "You Are My Sunshine." It fits perfectly with the day. So,
right. So we're gonna drop those links, and if you feel inclined, you're gonna sit and you're gonna click and you're gonna donate, or you're gonna find out ways that you can advocate, get involved, build more awareness, and share. So I thank you guys for staying with us for over the last hour plus. Really appreciate it. Sally, I am blessed and honored and thankful that you are not only in my circle of powerhouse moms, but that you were here and willing to share your advocacy story, your journey of the loss of your beautiful little girl, and all of the action and campaigning that is needed for SUDEP. So I thank you for that.
And thank you so much for reaching out to me and for all the work that you do in educating in so many areas of special needs and different topics. And that is so needed. And I think your work is amazing. And so thanks for talking to me and reaching out. And I'm glad there were some other powerhouse moms that introduced us. And yes. It really helps create a wonderful network. And I love my daughter. I miss her huge every day. And so I hope if one person today learns from this and is able to advocate in a different way for themselves or their loved one, then I've just helped, that much more. So thank you.
Thank you again. And remember, alone we can do so little, but together we can do so much. You all have a fabulous evening. Thanks so much for tuning in. Thank you, Sally.
Bye. Thank you.
Bye.